Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me again today Sean Campbell. Sean Campbell is founder and CEO of Cascade Insights. He has done a tremendous amount with professional services companies. He's spoken with Fortune 50 companies on up and on down. He has helped people look at how do you develop, how do you grow, what do you do in these uncertain times. And so we're going to start there, and then I want to focus a bit more on marketing and what is it that professional services companies need to look at with marketing. So I'll let you take it from there, Sean.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for having me on again too, by the way. Clearly this is an uncertain time. I mean, we're currently recording this in the early December timeframe of 2020. And I only mention that because obviously, a lot changes month to month, but there are some perennial topics that we're going to get into too, and how those connect to the current challenges. But I think many services firms probably look back in this year and think March, April, May was perhaps one of the more challenging seasons they've ever been through. Probably looking at scenarios for their business that involve letting go employees, changing, structure, and not to leave out the fact, changing their own personal compensation, right? I mean, that's a legitimate factor, right? We don't own businesses just to, give the money away. At some point, that money has to accrue back to us, and we have mortgages to pay as owners too, and kids to put through school. And so I think it's been a really challenging year in a lot of regards. And I think one of the natural temptations, I think, for service firm owners when things get tough is they start to broaden what they do. And I would argue that actually you need to do the opposite, and with a certain intelligent mindset around it, right? And I think we briefly addressed this in our first chat, but we're going to spend a little more time on it here. The idea of the age of narrow, which is something I started saying a while ago. I don't mean narrow thinking. We have plenty of that on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and every other place we could go. That's not what I mean. I mean, like, in the positive sense of choice. We live in a world where basically every single time you buy something, if you are so inclined, you can find as many choices that exist to serve that need. If you like sci-fi shows, you can find every sci-fi show that's not just current, but has been recorded. If you like British period dramas, you can go find every British period drama that exists. If you like cooking shows, you can bathe yourself in cooking shows 24/7. And what I think people haven't quite realized at times is in this, let's call it slightly more staid side of professional services, high-end kind of white collar services that are given to large companies or mid-markets, and then maybe are more B2B, because that's where my experience comes from. People act a little bit like, oh, no. I mean, it's a very rational decision-making process there. You know what I mean? We've got our great clients. They're going to stick with us for forever. And what's really happening is all of your clients are doing the same thing with their services firms that they do with their Netflix queue. They're looking at everybody. The barrier to them finding a new firm is basically this little tiny fence they jump over in their browser, and then they can find anybody else they want to go work with. And so the question is, when they're searching for all those firms, when they're looking for maybe to replace you, or they're looking for a new firm for a new problem, what's going to help them decide? And I think the old school way of thinking about this was always to say, let's make this as broad as we can go, going all the way back to the idea of like Super Bowl ads, and this idea of like as big as we can make it, as broad as we can be. And what actually makes us click a link on the internet really isn't that. Why do we joke that cat videos are the most important thing on TikTok? Because at the end of the day, it's the narrowness of the subject matter that draws us in. That's what the internet's done to us, right? I mean, it's like, is that link of interest to me personally? It's what happens in Facebook. You can even argue it's part of what's wrong with Facebook's algorithm, is that it allows that kind of narrowing. But that's for a different podcast and beyond my pay grade to analyze. But that's what makes someone click a link, is the narrowness of the link in terms of its direct applicability to them. So when you're a service firm owner, or you lead a marketing team or a sales team, when the economy gets tight, to tie it back to that really meta theme here, the temptation is to really leave things really open and say, oh, yeah, that lead that came in, that's not really our strong suit, but gosh, I need revenue and I really need to go do that. And what I would suggest is that's the time to say no. That's the time to remain narrow, be patient, grow in the lane that you're in. May that mean in a tough season, you do have to lay people off? Yes, potentially. But I think the long-term benefit and the long-term accrual that you get as a business owner, and frankly, the long-term kind of success and safety for any employee you hire is really predicated on your ability to keep your firm appropriately narrow. And the last thing I'd say about it, just to tie it together, is this isn't going to go away. I mean, we live in a world where basically, like I said at the top, everybody gets to choose exactly the thing they wanted to do. We live in a world of extremely narrow hobbies, narrow interests, narrow experiences. The world is very small these days, and that's great in one way, right? I don't want to go back to 3 television stations like when I was a kid, but but we haven't really let that impact the way we think about buyers in like these kind of traditional markets that have been around for a long time, like services and B2B. And that's really what needs to change.
Sean, along with that, I was in Israel in August doing some work. And one of the things that struck me was HR director of a large IT company made the comment to me that the gift of COVID was that it had, with people working from home, it eliminated national boundaries. So she could recruit from anywhere in the world top talent. So to your point, it is the choices that are available are incredible. And so getting through that and making sure that people understand what you have to offer, that is going to be an increasing challenge. I think you.
Well, right. Agree. I completely agree. And for a firm, the professional service market is interesting. And if you loop in lawyers and accountants and anybody who's done professional services into that group, if you took a look at their websites and their marketing efforts and you compared them to almost any other vertical that you could think of, anything at all, it usually sucks. To be honest, the website is poor, the messaging is poor, the content is poor, the SEO is poor. They're not running any pay-per-click ads, and if they are, they're poor. There's a phrase my business partner, to give him credit, used to say about our website in our earliest days, long, long ago. It exists to not disqualify us. That's pretty much what it exists to do. Like, there has to be something at that URL. Like, if there's nothing at that URL, then something must not be right. And it's even true that some services firms sell without anything at that URL. We've seen people do that, like in the old days, right? They wouldn't even have anything there. It would be like coming soon, and they're still growing. And so that gap has existed for so long. It's built in a bit of complacency. And what I want to tie this to is exactly what you were talking about, in that buyers, now that they're all trapped at home, and to an extent, some of them aren't even feeling trapped. They're like, this is great, and this is where I want to be, right? So we're going to see that behavior. They don't have the same little bubble of vendors who visited them.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so now that same person is going out and saying, let me use Google as my therapist, which everybody uses Google as their therapist to varying degrees. Right. And so they go out there and they type all this stuff into Google. I know there's somebody on the Bing team at Microsoft that's saying, what about us? And I'm always like, nobody uses you. So it's Google all the time. And so, but at the end of the day, they're doing that now in a way that they weren't before. And we have seen, honestly, there's no other really way to describe it. We've seen a really nice explosion in the number of our leads this year during COVID. And at one point I was thinking, and we had a hard Q2 like everybody else. When everything shut down, that hit everybody's pipeline, and that was kind of a mess. We've had more leads this year than we've ever had. And at one point it dawned on me, I was like, okay, well, there are things we're doing right that we could talk about that are generalities that people could do. But I realized, we sell to the Fortune 500, to mid-markets, to even Fortune 50s. We also would fly to these accounts and go visit them and hang out with them and do all those things. Well, now none of that activity is happening. All of that is closed off to every vendor. So go figure, a company who's really invested in marketing and spent a lot of time in it as a service firm, compare us to the other guys who have websites who don't just exist to not disqualify them. Well, who are they going to call when they're sitting in their office looking at a new vendor choice or a new professional services firm to support a new initiative? If you didn't exist in kind of the marketing landscape before, and you were, going through events and conferences and speaking engagements and flying to clients, I don't really know any other way to describe it except you're toast. And we've even seen it a couple times this year where we've had a couple smaller firms that typically wouldn't maybe be the size we would work with as a company, like a 10-person consulting firm come to us. But they've come to us and said, and I feel really bad for these guys. They've come a few different times and said, my entire pipeline dried up.
Yeah.
It's just gone. And I'll ask, well, how are you getting leads? And they're like, well, I was on planes. I gave conference talks. I had my referral network. And I'm like, I know where they all went. They went to the firm who actually had marketing. And now, but this is a solvable thing, as we'll talk about. It's just a matter of whether you're going to spend the time or not.
Okay, so let's talk about the solutions. What do we do in this world? And because I think it is the challenge that people are really trying to figure out. Where did they get the lead? How did you grow your leads in the last half of the year, given the disaster of the first half of the year? The turnaround, what caused it? Let's get into that and talk about that.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'd say is kind of a meta point, which is that marketing is probably the hardest business area for a professional service firm leader to spend time on. And the reason is it has the weakest telemetry and it has the longest tail. And just to unpack that briefly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Just to unpack that briefly, like sales tends to be a little more visceral. You talk to a client, the client offers you work, the client doesn't offer you work. You kind of debrief why that happened. You move on to the next, right? Doing the work. Well, that's a clear, easy transaction. You're doing it, you're providing value, you're hearing good things from clients. If you don't do a good job, you hear that too, and then you fix your process and you move on. Even finance, something that's sometimes neglected by service firm owners in terms of like putting really good procedures around that. They're forced to deal with it at some point. Otherwise, they don't get paid and they don't pay anybody else. So at some point, they have to stare at finance regardless. Marketing is this other thing that, like has been said for years, I don't know which percent, which 50% of my marketing budget's actually being successful, right? I just don't know which part. So one, you've got telemetry that's weaker signals. And two, if you think about the way marketing is supposed to work in a professional services context, a lead could find your website and then take a few months before they actually fill out the contact form, right? They could take a while to actually finally engage with you as they learn about you and think about you. Now I'll say what's interesting I found is that's not as true as people think it is. Sometimes the speed of that is surprising. They will kind of fill out the form pretty quickly. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with this process that is a little less obvious in terms of what's happening inside it. And then on top of it, and this is a tough thing, but sometimes service firm leaders don't spend enough time to ask themselves, do I have something unique to say? When they're in a landscape of, I don't know, say you're a great accountant and you're out there doing accounting work and all your clients love you. The things you're doing for them may not be unique enough to create like compelling content. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, what do I know that's actually somewhat unique in this space? And if you don't have that, that's not the end of the world. You just need to recognize that your marketing campaign won't look like the ones you hear about, that the content intelligentsia tells us about, which is like, go build this amazing engine, come up with amazing insights. Everyone will come to you and love you and read your content. And then you're diligently posting blog posts for years and no one's coming, right? And so I think the lie that's sometimes told to the service firm owner who's trying to start their marketing practice is, you're a genius, you're a thought leader. The minute you start writing, people will come. And I would say that's not entirely really the best initial approach. And I can unpack that in a bit if you want to, but that's just some initial meta thoughts about things.
Right. No, please unpack that further, because I think That is often what is taught and told, and is what's present on the internet right now. And if you talk to any SEO company, that's what they would tell you as well.
Right, right. And I think the problem with that is that there's only so many of us that have invented something incredibly new worth talking about that way, right? But then on the other hand, if you're in a space where there's a fair amount of interest, there's a lot of need for accountants in your market, there's a lot of need for lawyers in your market, there's a lot of need for research firms in your market, whatever you are, um, you need to be a little bit more pragmatic about it, I think, than thinking you're going to be this like content genius and say, okay, what do these people search for at the end of the day? And ask your clients, like, if you were going to search for me, what would it be, right? And start to actually really do some homework and research on that. Ask your clients specifically, if I went out to Google and you were trying to replace me or you're trying to find another firm, and I know that can be a tough conversation to have because you don't want to even open the idea that that's possible, but you need to do that. And you need to do it with any lead that comes into the company. Like, how did you find me? How did you find me? And then you're going to start to build up a little bit of a database of phrases and keywords and terms that you could actually do well at. And then at that point, you need to start asking yourself, okay, how flooded are those keywords and terms? And what's really interesting is for most professional service firm niches, they're not that flooded. They're just not. And so what I would advocate is, instead of doing the content first, I would actually advocate doing some pay-per-click first, because the costs in comparison to the actual deals you get, most professional services firms, the average deal size is fairly large. We're not talking about selling hair dryers here at 20 bucks a pop. A service firm contract might be 5K, 10K, 100K. So for you to pay 10 or 20 bucks a click, it is kind of irrelevant at that point, right? So what I tell people to do is start with the pay-per-click, because Google's pay-per-click engine gives you a great place to experiment with a lot of the language you use with clients. Like, what an SEO firm would tell you to do is they'd almost do the other way. They tend to say, like, okay, let's refix your website. Let's change everything about it. Let's have you write a bunch of content. Let's build some great landing pages. It's going to take months. They're going to tell you, you're going to have to write a blog post a week. You're going to have to write it on all these subjects. And like I hit earlier, I don't really think people spend months and months and months staring at your content before they call you. There are some people who do that, but I don't really think that's the way it plays out. Think about it in your own personal life. When you need somebody to do your landscaping, how fast does that happen? I mean, how fast does that happen? You go through Google, you use it as your therapist, you find 3 or 4 people, you call 3 or 4 people, and you're done. Did you even look at the blog on that company's website? No, probably didn't. We'll get back to why the blog's relevant. It's useful for things, but not, I think, in the way that people typically talk about it. So I would say start with the pay-per-click. And most importantly, when you're using the pay-per-click, use exactly the same language you use to talk to your own prospects. Again, the flaw in a lot of advice, I think, for services firms is, it's like you write an ad that says B2B market research, and you have a landing page that says B2B market research, and you have it. But if you're starting out, you're not going to rank, right? So what you really want is, you want an ad that is in the right language, in the right tone, so the buyer feels almost like they're talking to you, right? I'm not saying don't have any of your keywords in the ad or the page, but it's more about that authenticity. It's about narrow. Does this feel like a narrow ad that's targeted at me? That's really what I need to see. And then over time, you can build out a bigger content pipe that will help increase your domain rank and your authority and whatever. So in the end, to sum it up, at least in the initial stages, I think most professional services firms would do better to put a set of ads out where they use the language they typically use with clients in the ads, use that engine to give real metrics and analysis of, like, hey, that really works. That generates clicks, that generates conversions. And then once you have some of that, then you can go back and say, okay, what else do I need to do to my website? What do I need to change to make that happen? So I'll stop there for a minute. We could keep going, but that's some initial thoughts.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is, in a sense, so people look from the marketing, and then sales sort of gets their orders from that based on what the strategy is. But if you're looking at, this is how I talk to my customer and how I sell, you're really looking from the sales eyes, moving up into how is that impacting the whole organization. And
Right.
it's a age old argument, what comes first, sales or marketing? And companies always have that struggle as to how do they choose. But what you're saying makes a tremendous amount of sense, because at some point people have got to see who you are, and it's that sales script that does communicate that.
Well, right. And on that point, briefly, like I think um, whether sales should be in the lead on your messaging, for a professional services firm, the answer is 110% yes. Because the sales cycles are long. Your sellers are probably also delivery people or were delivery people at one point. They completely understand how to message to clients over a period of months or years or decades. So whatever that team is using for phraseology or statements or whatever, that has to be, and that's the way we do our marketing, is that it comes up out of the sales team, that the initial tidbits of like what needs to happen. And the marketing team, of course, that we have has been here a really long time. Like one of our senior marketers has been here over 5 years. And so she obviously has a really good understanding of that stuff. But if somebody new comes here, when we add new people to the team, I tell them, you're going to have to listen to sales, because they have basically those day-to-day interactions. The place where I'd say it's not true is like, if you have a very transactional sales force that's just like selling the next Avis car rental, okay, they don't really necessarily know what's great messaging. They're basically just transactally serving a customer base, right? But if you have this consultative sale, yeah, I think the best messaging comes out of there. And that's where the mistakes happen. So you take that sales messaging, you use Google's own ad engine to give you really like good telemetry on what's going to engage. Um, and then the other big thing for a services firm is, and I don't know why this is true because it should be one of the more straightforward things to do, but the contact us page is usually a travesty. I don't know why it's always so horrible, right? And examples of that are a contact us page that's like just has the name of the principal on it and like contact me, and there's no form. Or the form has like 97 fields because some marketing firm said like, no, you need to profile these people and you need to go do all this, right? Or more on a technical side, it might be a form that's just not generating good telemetry. It is very trivial these days to like hook up Google Analytics and, even for a small firm, and to know, hey, if that lead clicked my form, what else did they visit on my site before they click the form, right? Because that can give you great telemetry too. So anyway, that's just a couple thoughts there.
So Sean, as a professional services company with marketing today in this very uncertain time, and I don't think it's going to go away into 2021, at least not in the short term, what are your top 5 recommendations that people, where do they begin? Where do they focus? The top 5 things where they focus.
Well, I would definitely spend some money on the pay-per-click side, like I said, because it's a very good telemetry engine, better than you get for most things. I mean, and again, the costs are pretty minimal. I would say the other thing is asking yourself, who are you not going to serve, and putting that on the website. I think people are incredibly reluctant to do that.
Very loud about it. Okay.
Yeah. I think because everybody's looking for that anyway. I mean, what's the first thing we look for on Amazon with a product? The positive reviews or the negative ones?
The negative.
We look at the negative ones. When we go to Glassdoor, we look at the negative reviews of a company, right? And what I think is at the heart of that, and it's kind of sad actually, we don't trust the first information we're given. We've been trained as global citizens that the first time somebody shoves a Facebook link in front of us, hopefully, I guess, we read it critically. But I think that's the way people do it, especially when they're buying something, right? And so what I think saying what you don't do fairly quickly on the site does is it actually draws people in, because they're like, okay, good, shoulders relax. I know what you don't do. I don't have to go hunt for it now. I don't have to just figure out what you don't do. And so I would say that would definitely be number 2. Number 3, this is specifically tied to what's happened. I would say you have to get out of the like, I'm going to go give a conference talk to find leads kind of thing. I mean, that's endemic in professional services. And so that may mean you do your own podcast. That may mean you go out and start some kind of video series. That may mean you do something along those lines. But I think the conference engine is going to be forever changed. And I don't, because if people are going to be working from home, that also means they're going to be a lot more reluctant to travel. And they're even post COVID. I think, I don't think we're going to see that come back in the same way. So I think companies that have banked on that, I think that's a big change. I would not spend any time on social.
Really?
I think that's a big time suck for most people. I think if they actually looked at the leads they get from social versus the interactions they get from social, they'd find a fairly significant gap. Social is one of those things that makes us feel good, like partners, potential clients, whatever, engage with us. But if you actually tried to figure out if you got a lot of leads from social, I don't think they usually come in that way. And so, and our own data for our stuff, for example, shows the same thing. So that would be a place I would de-invest in. I don't know, and that gives you 4. Those are my top 4 at the moment.
It's interesting that you would de-invest in that, because if you look at social media and what the advice is on social media, obviously they are served by having you put a lot of energy.
Oh, right. Right. Everybody, they probably have hashtag Growthhacker on every other post they put up there, right? Or something silly like that. And so at the end of the day, it's a great point you raise that I think super important to think about when you look at marketing. Although you could say the same thing about sales consultants too. If somebody's written a book on prospecting and cold calling, they're going to tell you that cold calling is the greatest thing in the universe to do, right? And if somebody's an SEO copywriter, they're going to tell you that you have to go do a bunch of SEO copywriting work. And the same thing's true with social. If somebody's a genius on getting their Twitter account noticed, they're going to tell you that's. To me, I'm much more pragmatic about this. Every month we look at all of our leads and we say, where did they actually come from? What ads did they click? What pages did they go through? And to tie to something I said earlier, this can feel like something that's not bearing fruit immediately to a professional services firm owner. They're worried about selling. They're worried about doing the work. They're worried about making bank. And wiring up their website so it gives good telemetry is maybe the last thing on their mind, right? And I would say it's super important because it lets you know if any of those investments are actually panning out. And you really, really have to do that. So, and I would just tell people, go talk to other service firm owners, ask them how they're generating leads and how they're doing stuff. I would steer clear of the intelligentsia who they're all about social media, so they just tell you all day to use social media kind of thing.
What's your sense? I'm hearing some talk amongst companies about collaborating in order to companies who are not necessarily competitive for the same leads collaborating so that they can maximize their efforts and grow their leads. Your thoughts on that?
I think that's a good idea. I think partnerships are good up to an interesting point. The problem with partnerships is it's like a power imbalance issue. Right. Let's say you have a relationship with another partner and they're consistently giving you leads and referrals and you're excited about it. If you don't own those client relationships in the end to the same degree, all it will take is kind of an economic challenge or collapse for that partner to just narrow in on their own business. They hunch their shoulders, they focus in on their own, and they're not interested in giving you any referrals at all. So to me, I think it's about a healthy power balance. If you can keep that with your referral partners, that's great. Because at the end of the day, they're independent entities. If times get tough, they're going to focus on themselves. Right. And I've seen many business owners over the years, when the economy is good, do this arc where they grow this business. They don't invest in sales and marketing. They have these great referral partners. And then the economy kind of stutters or collapses for a period of time. And they don't have any inbound activity. And it's because they didn't grow up their own engine and that's going to take time. So I don't mean to be so down on it. I think it's a useful piece of the mix, but if you're not figuring out how to keep it appropriately constrained, I think you're putting your total business at risk at some point.
Got it. Don't risk one for the other. Do them both.
Right.
Right. And
right.
so you have that safety net. Sean, anything we've missed? We have this. Our time goes always so fast when we talk. What have we missed that we should cover?
I would just maybe say, when you're sitting there as a professional service firm owner, and you're thinking, I don't have time in my week to devote to marketing. I've got sales to go do. I've got calls to make. I've got, delivery to go do. I've got projects to run. I would just say, recognize that if you don't do that, at some point, the stress you feel about always having to get work and do the work and get work and do the work will never go away. One of the beauties about marketing is there's nothing more awesome than just watching leads come through your website that you can service. There's nothing, in the sense, and it's very validating, because when you pick up the phone and they're like, yeah, I checked you out. You were exactly who I was looking for, narrow, right? You had exactly the right things to say. It's awesome. It's great. And too many service firm owners live in this very hand to mouth kind of thing they're doing over and over again. And a marketing engine actually gives you peace of mind, because it's this way to know I have this thing that's generating leads for me. And I'll close with this, like, even when I'm on vacation, like, one of the greatest things is I go on vacation. And I remember my younger self, right, where I was doing all the selling and no marketing, website that existed to not disqualify us and all that. And I would go on vacation and selling would stop and project generation would stop. Now I go on vacation, leads just come in through the website. I just hand them off to myself. And there's something wonderful about building engines like that. And they take time and they take passion and they take consistency. And in the very beginning, the wheel doesn't spit out that much, because that's what takes time. But I think if you haven't tried it, you really need to spend some time on it. Because for me, it's probably one of the smartest things I've ever done, is to build a really, really deep and involved marketing function in our business. And I would never regret it. So that's what I would end with.
Sean, thank you. I've said this to you before, but I think one of the things that's so needed is a real pragmatic book, how to, and this is what you should do with marketing. Because I think, I know myself, I've spent months in circles, and then you go, oh, if only somebody would have told me this earlier. And it's all you discover by trial and error. And it's a shame that that's the way it is, but it is. And because our universities, first of all, are not up to date often on what is happening in the marketing world and sales world today, and in terms of what the importance is of that for growth and really building businesses. It's always been important, but today I think it's even more important.
Completely agree. And thanks for having me on too.
You are so welcome, Sean. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are listening, we'll make sure you have the connection to the first podcast that we did with Sean, and information about him will be in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for being with us. And remember to visit our website at buildtomorrow.com and our social media at buildtomorrow.com. Thanks much. Thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell button above. Leave comments. We'd love to hear what you think. And visit our other social media links as well. Thanks much.